Hello, my name is Martha Kelly, and I will be presenting on FERPA today. FERPA is also known as the Family, Educational Rights and Privacy Act. What is FERPA? FERPA is an acronym that stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which I will abbreviate to FERPA throughout the presentation. FERPA's sole purpose is to protect the privacy of students' educational records. Their educational records and information can include, but is not limited to, their name, their address, social security number, academic records, and behavioral records. In order to better understand what FERPA is, it is important to discuss the history of the Act itself. FERPA, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, was created in 1974. It became effective 90 days after its creation, on November 21st, 1974. FERPA was commonly referred to as the Buckley Amendment, which is named after the New York State Senator at the time, James Buckley. FERPA was created to address a number of concerns identified by the educational community. The community included parents, students, and educational institutions. Who does FERPA protect? So FERPA protects any and all students under the age of 18 who are enrolled in schools or academic institutions that receive federal funds. This also can include higher education, such as colleges and trade schools. FERPA protects the privacy of the student's academic or educational records. The Act applies to all schools or institutions that receive federal funds under applicable programs of the United States Department of Education. What rights does FERPA afford a student? So FERPA gives parents and eligible students access to their educational records. These rights transfer to the student themselves when they turn 18 years of age or attend another school or institution beyond the high school level, such as college or higher education. This is when the student is deemed an eligible student. I will be referring to eligible students and parents throughout the presentation. Parents and eligible students have the right to review the educational records maintained by the school. Parents and eligible students also have the right to request that a school correct or make changes to educational records if they believe that the information in the record is inaccurate or misleading. If the school denies the changes to be made to the record, parents or eligible students have the right to request a formal hearing. If after the formal hearing the request is still denied, parents or eligible students may place a statement within the record itself stating their view or explaining why they believe the information stated is incorrect. Schools or institutions must also have written permission from the parent or eligible student in order to release any information pertaining to that student's educational record. Schools, however, can disclose educational information in certain cases. Examples of such exemptions include school officials who have legitimate educational interest, schools that the student is transferring to, specific individuals for audit or evaluation purposes, parties in connection with providing financial aid to that student, accrediting organizations of that school, judicial orders or a lawfully issued subpoena, officials in cases of health and safety emergencies, and state and local authorities per the law of that state. There are considered FERPA best practices for public schools. What I was able to get from the U.S. Department of Education on their website covered pre-K all the way through 12th grade. And as educators, we have the daunting task of protecting students' educational and personal information. This can be especially difficult now because we are in such a digital age where information is readily available at the fingertips. The question lies in what can we do to protect ourselves and our students from a FERPA violation. There are several resources out there that help both educators and the schools or institutions that they work in. Some of the best resources that I was able to find within my research was training modules provided by PTAC, which is an acronym for the Privacy Technical Assistance Center. This is currently run by the United States Department of Education. I found this particularly helpful because they provided free and effective training modules for not only teachers, administrators, but also the schools and other staff that touches student data as well. Some of the training that I was able to find was data breach training, best practices for destruction of data, and a helpful data security checklist that anyone can use who happens to be handling student information. So the data breach training from the U.S. Department of Education included password protecting computers effectively, training the IT staff to keep records secure. So this goes beyond the scope of the teacher, but to the individuals who happen to maintain the network of the school itself. Administrative and faculty professional development. Best practices for data destruction. This included free training from PTAC, or again, Privacy Technical Assistive Center. This training included data privacy, how to keep data private, confidentiality, how to keep information confidential without including the student's information, security practices related to student-level data systems. Again, that's more towards the IT area, but it is important to, as an educator, to see how this works. And again, the data security checklist. This is a helpful checklist that anyone can print out from the site. I included the information at the end of my slides. This is training and a checklist provided again by PTAC. The checklist contains various components that cover protection of a student's records that are the responsibility as a whole of this school. So what can happen if a FERPA violation occurs? So if a FERPA violation occurs, the consequences can be serious and even detrimental to an educational organization. If a FERPA violation or breach were to occur, parents or eligible students can file a complaint with the Department of Education's Family Policy Compliance Office. This is also known as FPCO for short. It is important to note that complaints filed must contain specific allegations of fact. This usually requires evidence of that violation. Complaints need to be filed within 180 days of the accused violation. And FPOC will then give notice in writing to both parties, the parent or eligible student that filed the complaint, and the accused educational organization that a complaint was received and an investigation will be taking place. If FPCO finds a violation has indeed taken place, 3 instances can happen. 1, the Secretary of the Department of Education may withhold payments to that school under any applicable federal programs the school receives. 2, they can issue a complaint to compel through a cease and desist order. And 3, they can terminate the school's eligibility to receive federal funding. And if your school requires federal funding to run certain programs, this can be detrimental to that school because they will lack the funding to run appropriately. Upon my research, I did find several important cases. Some of them were landmark and other ones were associated cases. I found that these cases pertained well to FERPA in terms of violations, and that some of them even supported the creation of the act in the first place. Again, it's important to understand the history as well as the different types of cases that happened with FERPA, so that way, as educators, we can better understand and protect ourselves from wrongful FERPA violations. The first landmark case that helped in the formulation of FERPA itself was that of Griswold versus Connecticut. While this case was not school law per se, it actually happened to deal with criminalizing the use of contraceptives, and this was found that it violated the right to marital privacy. This court case did have to do with proving the constitutional right to privacy, which was supported by the Supreme Court. While this case, again, wasn't school law, it did have something to do with helping prove that the Constitution values our privacy, and that way it was able to be referred to when FERPA was created. The second case that was helpful to FERPA, or actually had something to do with FERPA, was the United States versus Miami University. This happened in the Sixth Circuit Court. In this case, the court held that a newspaper does not have the unrestricted access to student disciplinary records because such records are deemed educational records and are protected by FERPA. This case was important because it gave specific evidence and an example of what is FERPA protected student information. The third and last case that I thought was helpful to helping explain FERPA was Owasso Independent School District versus Falvo. In this court case, the Supreme Court determined that grades on peer-graded evaluations or peer-graded papers, this, for example, can be when students swap papers and correct each other's work. They found that this does not qualify as educational records, and they are not protected by FERPA. So if you're a teacher that does this practice, you are okay. So recap and conclusions. Again, FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It is an act that protects student records. It also claims who can access the records and who is supposed to be protecting those student records. Rights under FERPA. They cover the parent of the student or the eligible student. Again, an eligible student is one who is 18 years of age or older, or who has left to attend another higher education institution. Parents and eligible students have the right to access their educational records. They also have the right to contest what is on their records and request a formal hearing to change it. The claims of the inaccuracies, again, must be backed by evidence and factual in nature. If the record cannot be changed, a note can be left in the file stating why the parent or the eligible student felt that the information left in the file was inaccurate or inappropriate to be in that record. FERPA regulations apply to any and all students that attend an educational institution that receives federal funding. So again, this can be a school, this can be a university, this can be a trade school. Failure to comply with FERPA requirements can lead to a school or educational organization losing their federal funding. So certain programs that they run, they will not receive funding for that if they are at fault for a FERPA violation. Lastly, schools and educational organizations that comply with FERPA have access to training programs that ensure best practices. And many of them are free through the U.S. Department of Education. And as an educator, it is very important to understand FERPA, your rights as an educator, and what the rights are of that student and their parents. I also included where you can find more information. There's a 1-800 number if you prefer non-computer-based information. There's an address to write to. And there's also two helpful websites. There's ptac.ed.gov. That one, again, is the where you can find the training modules that I mentioned here. Again, they're free. There's a lot of videos, handouts, and different information that you can read about. And the last link is to that of the U.S. Department of Education and FERPA. Thank you for listening.